Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive into another juicy topic that can really make a difference in how we navigate, well, life.
Absolutely. And this one's close to my heart because, let's be real, who hasn't felt that wave of stress wash over them when conflict comes knocking?
Oh, for sure. Like that feeling in your stomach when you know a tough conversation is brewing. So today we're tackling conflict head-on with Ray A. Stonehouse's Resolving Conflicts with Confidence.
Great pick. I devoured this book. It's packed with real strategies, not just vague advice, so it's perfect for our deep dive today.
Totally. And I love how Stonehouse starts off strong, really challenging that whole conflict is bad mentality right out of the gate.
Yeah.
What was your take on that?
It's like we're almost programmed to think of conflict as this negative force. But Stonehouse flips the script and says, hold up, what if it's actually an opportunity for growth?
Okay, I'm intrigued. So less about avoiding disagreements and more about learning to navigate them in a way that actually benefits us.
Exactly. And they back it up by highlighting how effective conflict resolution can transform our lives. I mean, we're talking improved communication, stronger relationships, less stress. Isn't that something we all want, really?
100%. Less stress, sign me up.
Yeah.
But easier said than done, right?
Right, because like anything worth mastering, it takes practice and the right tools, which is exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Yeah. So where do we even begin?
Well, Stonehouse kicks things off by acknowledging those common barriers that often trip us up in chapter 2. Like the fear of confrontation. Or maybe we just don't have the communication skills to articulate our needs effectively. Ever feel like that?
Oh, all the time. Like my mind goes blank or I say something in the heat of the moment and then I'm like, did I really just say that?
And Stonehouse really hones in on this thing called emotional reactivity, which basically means our emotions are driving the bus before we can even process what's happening.
Oh, I know that bus ride all too well. Usually doesn't end well.
Yeah.
So how do we hit the brakes before we find ourselves careening off a cliff?
Okay, so picture this. Chapter 3 swoops in with the superpower we can all develop. Are you ready for it? Assertiveness.
Okay, I gotta admit, when I hear assertiveness, I sometimes picture someone being kind of aggressive, you know?
Right. But Stonehouse makes it clear. Assertiveness isn't about being a bull in a china shop. It's about finding that sweet spot between being a doormat and a steamroller.
I like that. So how do we find that sweet spot? What does healthy assertiveness look and sound like?
It's about confidently and respectfully communicating your needs and boundaries. It's not about attacking or blaming. And one of my favorite tools from the book, I statements.
I statements, I've heard of them, but honestly, I sometimes feel like they can sound a bit forced.
Totally. Like a robot trying to express feelings or something. But the trick is authenticity, like really owning your experience. Instead of saying, you're always late, try, I feel anxious when I'm left waiting without knowing what's going on.
So it's about shifting the focus from blaming to expressing.
Exactly. And Stonehouse encourages role-playing to get comfy with these techniques.
See, role-playing, even in my own head, feels awkward.
I hear you, but think of it like this. It's a safe space to stumble, experiment, and find what feels authentic before you're in the thick of it. Like a dress rehearsal for real-life conversations. They even suggest practicing in front of a mirror. Game changer, I'm telling you.
Okay, you've convinced me role-playing it is. So we're getting assertive, but what about the other side of the coin? What about truly listening when emotions are running high? How do we do that?
Well, that's where Stonehouse introduces our next secret weapon in chapter 4. Active listening.
Okay, I'm always up for a good secret weapon.
Right.
What's the difference between regular listening and active listening?
Think of it like this. It's about tuning in on all frequencies, not just hearing the words, but really trying to understand the message behind the words. What are they really trying to say, and what emotions are fueling those words? Empathy is key here.
It's like stepping into their shoes.
Right.
Even if you don't fully agree with their perspective, easier said than done, especially when you're also trying to make your own point.
So true. It's a skill that needs constant practice. One technique I found super helpful from Stonehouse is paraphrasing.
Paraphrasing, you mean like reflecting back what you've heard to make sure you're both on the same page?
Exactly. Instead of just nodding along, you can say something like, okay, so what I'm hearing is, and summarize their main point. It shows you're truly invested in understanding their perspective, which can be incredibly powerful in de-escalating a tense situation.
Right.
It can really make the other person feel heard and understood, which can sometimes be all it takes to dial down the tension.
So much better than just waiting for our turn to talk, which I'm guilty of sometimes. But okay, say we're doing our best to actively listen, But those emotions are bubbling up,
Hmm.
that fight or flight response kicks in. What do we do then?
That's something Stonehouse brings up in chapter 5 that I found so fascinating. They talk about how conflict can actually trigger that primal fight or flight response in us.
Wait, really? So our bodies are literally gearing up for battle when we're in a disagreement.
Yeah.
No wonder it can feel so intense.
Exactly. Our heart rate speeds up, palms get sweaty. We're ready to either fight for our lives or make a run for it, even if it's just a verbal disagreement.
Wow, I never thought of it like that, but it makes so much sense. Okay, so how do we keep those primal instincts in check? How do we avoid becoming that, stressed out, reactive version of ourselves?
Well, Stonehouse gives us some seriously practical tools for that. They delve into techniques for managing those emotional responses. Like, ever heard of taking a deep breath?
I think so. Isn't that like step one in every self-help book ever written?
Yeah, but there's a reason for it. It actually works. And paired with what Stonehouse calls taking a pause, that's huge. Remember that pause button we talked about earlier?
Right. So we're not just hitting pause on the conversation itself, but also on our own internal reactions. I like it. What else is in this toolkit?
Okay, so they have this technique called cognitive reframing, which might sound kind of intimidating, but it's actually pretty simple. It's about choosing to view a situation in a more, shall we say, constructive light.
Okay, I'm all about constructive.
Yeah.
Give me an example.
Okay.
How do we actually reframe a situation when it feels like everything is going wrong?
Okay, let's say you're dealing with a coworker and it seems like every idea you present in a meeting gets shot down, right? It's so easy to just feel defeated or defensive, right?
100%. It can be so frustrating.
Right. But instead of immediately thinking, ugh, they just don't respect my ideas, what if you tried shifting your perspective to something like, okay, so maybe this specific approach didn't resonate with them. Maybe there's a different way to frame it, or maybe they have some valid concerns that I haven't considered.
So it's about finding that more, I don't know, empowering way to look at it, even if it's tough at first.
Exactly. And, it's important to remember that Stonehouse isn't saying you shouldn't feel those negative emotions, anger, frustration, those are all valid. It's more about how do we acknowledge them without letting them completely control how we behave? Responding, not just reacting.
Responding, not reacting.
Hmm.
I'm going to write that one down. Love it. And it kind of ties into that whole assertiveness thing we were talking about earlier, right?
Totally. It's all connected. And one of the coolest parts of the book is in chapter 6, where Stonehouse lays out this super relatable case study to show these techniques in action.
Oh, yeah. Laura and Tom, that whole scenario felt so real. What did you think?
Right. Like, we've all been there. You have Laura, the project manager, swamped with deadlines, and then Tom, a developer on her team, feeling like his contributions are being overlooked. Classic workplace drama.
Oh, the drama.
Yeah.
I was hooked. And I love how Laura used that I statement technique to talk to Tom about it.
Yes. Instead of just accusing him of not doing his part, she was like, I feel overwhelmed with these deadlines approaching, and I need to have a clearer understanding of everyone's progress so I can, manage everything effectively.
Such a good example. It wasn't about blaming. It was about expressing her needs and, inviting Tom to be part of the solution.
Yeah. Right. It created that space for a more collaborative problem-solving approach, which is what Stonehouse is all about. And speaking of problem solving, chapter 7 is where they really deliver on the goods. It's like a gold mine of practical strategies.
Like a treasure chest of tools for navigating those tough conversations.
Exactly. Stonehouse walks you through clear steps you can take, like from how to actually prepare for a difficult conversation, because let's be real, winging it rarely works out, to navigating those moments when things start to get heated, to following up afterwards.
So good. It's like having a step-by-step guide, which I think we all need sometimes.
Totally. And for those who are ready to really level up their conflict resolution game, Stonehouse has a whole chapter dedicated to self-directed exercises.
Oh, yeah. Chapter 8. I love this part. It's like a bonus round for those who want to really dive deep.
Right. There are journaling prompts, mindfulness techniques, even more role-playing scenarios to really practice what you're learning. It's fantastic.
Seriously, Stonehouse gives us all the tools we need to not just survive conflict, but to actually grow from it.
Right. Like, what if instead of dreading those tough conversations, we actually felt, ready to handle them? I mean, that would be a game changer, wouldn't it?
Talk about less stress.
Right.
Right. Okay, but how do we actually do that? How do we go from seeing conflict as this big, scary thing to an opportunity for growth?
Well, I think it starts with that shift in perspective we were talking about earlier, right? Like recognizing that conflict often comes from, unmet needs or different viewpoints.
Instead of seeing it as me versus you, it's more like, hey, we're both coming at this from different places. Let's figure it out together.
Exactly. And that takes, like you said, curiosity, a willingness to really listen, ask questions, and try to understand where the other person is coming from, even if we don't agree with them.
It's about replacing judgment with genuine interest, which is so much easier said than done, right? Especially in the heat of the moment.
Oh, 100%. It's easy to get caught up in our own heads, our own emotions, but that's where those communication skills that Stonehouse talks about become so essential, right?
Right. The I statements, the active listening, the paraphrasing, it's like they all work together to create that space for a more constructive conversation.
Absolutely. And the more we practice these skills, the more natural they become. It's like building a muscle, you know? It might feel awkward or uncomfortable at first, but over time, it gets easier.
This deep dive has been amazing. I honestly feel so much more equipped to handle those tricky conversations that I used to just like completely dread.
Me too. It's so empowering to realize that we actually have more control than we think when it comes to how we respond to conflict, right?
So to wrap things up, if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, I need this book in my life, we highly recommend checking out Resolving Conflicts with Confidence. And while you're at it, be sure to explore Ray A. Stonehouse's other books in the Self-Development miniseries. They're full of great advice for navigating, well, pretty much anything life throws your way.
Because investing in your communication skills and your ability to handle conflict constructively is truly an investment in yourself, your relationships, and honestly, your overall well-being.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Until next time, everyone, remember, conflict doesn't have to be a negative force in our lives. With the right tools and the right mindset, it can actually be a catalyst for some pretty amazing growth.